You were held back in second grade, weren't you? I think America should demand more from those who serve in Congress. That line dropped in the middle of a live segment, freezing the whole studio for a few moments. Not because it was witty, but because it was harsh. JD Vance, Republican senator known for his dry tone, had just mentioned Jasmine Crockett's past on air. Not about policy, not about government debate, but about a classroom nearly 30 years ago. JD Vance mocked Jasmine Crockett. Heartwarming stories. 3 decades ago, a school year when a 7-year-old black girl had to redo the grade. The camera shifted to Jasmine. No reply, no frustration, just a calm stare. For a while, as if she were hearing an old memory, not JD's voice, but the echo of a time when nobody stopped to ask why she didn't turn in her homework, the studio crowd watched closely, many holding their breath. The host looked briefly. Sure, JD sat tall, lips curling slightly as if he had just scored a point in this political battle, but he didn't realize a phone call was coming. A voice, aged, very slow, but one that would, shift everything. And if you're watching this far, let me ask, have you ever been judged for a tiny mistake in your past? Drop a comment and tell me where you're from. And be sure to subscribe if you think the truth shouldn't be hidden just because someone once fell a step behind. Because that story deserves to be told all the way through. The show aired during prime time on Fox Nation, titled Voice of Values, a space where conservative voices were pushed to speak openly without fear of being silenced. This time, the topic on deck was intelligence, leadership, and the fall of expectations. Hosting the program was Carson Green, a veteran figure often called out for leaning toward right-wing guests. And as expected, the spotlight that night was handed to JD Vance, a young senator recognized for his cold, sharp-edged style. Sitting across from him was a key name in black political spaces, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. From the very first moment, JD led the exchange like a courtroom without a referee. He used a firm tone laced with sarcasm to describe what he called an emotional whirlwind in politics, a direct swipe at Jasmine. He didn't wait to point out that she had once teared up during a congressional meeting, then asked, if someone is that emotional, can they really be trusted with national duties? The audience, mostly conservative backers, burst into laughter. The camera shifted to Jasmine. She didn't push back, didn't smile. She simply adjusted the mic and said, some cry from weakness, some cry because they finally get to speak, and some laugh because they see someone else's pain as amusement. That answer quieted the room for a moment, but JD didn't pause. He changed strategies, no longer focusing on feelings but targeting her history. I've seen the file. You were held back in second grade, right? Should a nation with the globe's top intellect put its faith in someone who couldn't clear a basic grade? There was no clapping, no laughter, only shock and uncertainty. How did he even learn that? No one responded, but JD kept going. I'm not saying folks who struggle in class don't deserve to speak. I'm just saying a national figure should reflect the nation's academic system. Jasmine's look didn't shift. She took a slow breath, then said, I did repeat a grade. Yes, second grade. I remember that day. The teacher didn't face me, just stared at a list and said, this girl isn't ready. No one asked why I didn't hand in the homework. No one asked why I nodded off every morning. No one asked anything at all. She stared directly at JD. You think smarts are measured by staying on track each academic year? Maybe. But sometimes intelligence is knowing why a kid falls behind. The vibe in the studio turned heavier. Carson, the host, quickly moved to the next topic. So, in your opinion, how should we measure someone's ability to represent others? Jasmine waited for a few moments. By whether that person dares to use the very story they were mocked for, to build a path for others who once had no platform. I don't need everyone to agree with me. I just need someone who's ever felt misunderstood to know they're not alone. There was no cheering, but there was also no pushback. Only one camera caught an audience member in the third row, their fist clenched tight ever since JD mentioned second grade. A small moment, but enough to show that wounds once thought healed when exposed in front of a crowd can sting like they happened just now. No one in the room spoke after Jasmine gave her answer. her voice calm, her eyes steady, but the silence didn't linger. JD Vance leaned toward the mic, his voice now quieter but still icy. I'm not dismissing the struggles you experienced, but what we're discussing is the qualification to represent. Isn't it a contradiction when someone who once couldn't pass second grade now instructs the nation on education? That remark landed like a knife, no longer teasing but a pointed attack. Viewers were left tense, even furious. Would Jasmine stay composed? Would she fire back? Jasmine didn't reply. She looked down at her hands, gently flipping a page in her notes. Not to read, but as if to steady them. The host, Carson, jumped in, trying to ease the tension. Maybe JD meant to discuss expectations, not personal jabs. But JD interrupted. I'm talking exactly about the personal. Jasmine represents the trend of dropping standards to diversify leadership, and repeating second grade is just one of several signs. The audience began to divide. A few voices shouted, "That's right," while others shook their heads. Just then, Carson got a cue from backstage. There was a live question from someone. In the hall, a young man stood up, wearing a white button-down and a freshman tag from Liberty Law School. He said, "I also grew up with nothing, but I've never used that as an excuse for failure. I want to ask Representative Jasmine, if you couldn't even pass second grade on time, what makes you think you're fit to write laws for this nation?" A wave of murmurs rolled through the space. It sounded like a real question, but it came, wrapped in bias and shame. Carson glanced toward Jasmine. JD gave a faint smile, the smile of someone who believed he'd just gained an unexpected partner. Jasmine turned to the young man. She wasn't upset. She didn't hurry to respond. She just asked quietly, "What's your name?" The young man paused. "Dylan." Jasmine nodded. "Dylan, you just used the word excuse. Do you believe a 7-year-old kid gets to pick the reasons they were held back?" The room went still. "Do you think a small child could say, 'I'm sorry, teacher. I didn't do well because I was starving, because my mom worked overnight shifts, because our power was shut off, and I couldn't finish homework?'" Dylan hesitated. "No one has to excuse surviving, Dylan. You just have to keep going. And if you still can, come back and lift someone else." Dylan sat down. He didn't say anything else. And that was the instant viewers couldn't look away. Not everyone had faced hunger or struggle, but everyone had once felt misunderstood, judged by a score. JD leaned a little forward, trying to steer the moment. He said, "Thanks for the moving story, but Congress needs folks who make decisions, not people who tell personal tales." Jasmine answered instantly. This time, her stare didn't shift. "And it's exactly because there are too many people making laws without understanding those personal stories that the system continues to fail millions of children like I once was." The studio crowd was now clearly split. Some clapped, others frowned. Carson shifted to audience questions submitted through the call board. A call came in. An older woman's voice, slow and calm, echoed, "My name is Miss Ruth. I used to tutor Jasmine when she was in second grade." No one saw that coming. JD gave a small laugh. "Oh, here comes another feel-good testimonial," but the woman didn't flinch. Her tone stayed calm. "I tutored her after school every Monday evening. I remember the first session. She looked at the board with heavy eyes. I asked, 'Why didn't you do your homework?' She said, 'Nothing.' It wasn't until the third session that I found out she hadn't eaten since breakfast. She wasn't slow. She was starving. And no one had asked why." A deep hush spread across the studio. "I'm not calling to defend her. I'm calling to remind you, sometimes intelligence isn't about how quickly you learn. It's about continuing to show up even when no one's paying attention." JD stopped smiling. He adjusted his mic. Carson said, "Thank you, Miss Ruth. That was a meaningful reflection." Miss Ruth added one last line. "I'm proud of the little girl she was and the woman sitting here now. Not because she proved she's clever, but because she proved no one has the right to label a hungry child as unfit." The line disconnected. The studio stayed silent, not from shock, but because everyone was staring at a truth. There had been kids left behind not because they didn't try, but because no one stopped to ask why. The camera moved to JD. He was looking down at his notepad, slowly flattening a page. But the words just spoken weren't written on any script. After the call from the woman named Ruth ended, no one in the studio spoke immediately. No one cleared their throat. No nervous laughter. Only air thick, like someone had just opened a door and revealed something everyone already knew, but never had the nerve to name. Jasmine Crockett stayed seated, back straight, head slightly lowered. Not victorious, not smug. She simply reached down and pulled open the small bag beside her seat. Her hand pulled out a laminated piece of paper. The top right corner slightly yellowed with age. The camera zoomed in. A handwritten sentence stood out in the teacher's note section. "This child doesn't need a new school. She needs food." Carson Green, the host, visibly twitched. He looked toward the studio coordinator with a puzzled glance. Should we move forward? But no answer came. Jasmine said nothing. She held the paper up, gently placed it near the microphone as if letting viewers at home read every word. She didn't raise her tone, didn't explain. She just said, "This is the sentence I've hidden for 25 years. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I didn't think anyone would care to hear it. Today, someone brought up the year I repeated second grade, and I thought, if they dare to mention it, then I should dare to let others see it." The paper shook slightly in her grip, not from wind, but from memories that wouldn't fade. JD Vance stayed quiet. His fingers gripped the notebook, but he scribbled nothing else. A woman in the crowd began to cry. She covered her lips with her hand, but the quiet sob was still noticeable. Jasmine turned to her and nodded softly. No words needed, because they understood each other without speaking. Then something nobody saw coming happened. An audience member stood up. A white middle-aged man in office clothes wearing a name tag that said Tom Garrison, Ohio. He said nothing. Just stood, one hand over his chest, eyes locked on Jasmine. Another person rose, then another. No chants, no signs, no slogans, no politics. Just standing like they were saying, "We didn't ask before, but we're standing now." Not to apologize, but to never stay quiet again. JD Vance glanced around. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. He was no longer steering the moment, but just watching it shift in silence. Carson, the host, was forced to jump in. "Ladies and gentlemen, we kindly ask that you remain seated so the show can continue." But his words drifted into the air, because no one sat down. Jasmine faced the camera and spoke directly into the lens. "If you were ever the kid who had to learn while hungry, if you were ever called slow because of your situation, if you ever wished someone had asked why you stayed silent, then I stand here, and I have not forgotten you." A wave of applause followed. Not booming, but deeply heartfelt. A real unscripted moment of unity. JD Vance shifted his stance, took a breath, and tried to bounce back. "I think we're getting too emotional. The real topic here is about, political standards, not sentimental memories." But just then, Carson got another signal from the tech crew. Another call. The host paused, then nodded. A man's voice came through, deep and steady. "I'm a middle school history teacher. In 1998, I was once told to remove a student from class because she was, too behind, falling off track. But I said no, because I knew she just needed breakfast. I don't know who Jasmine is, but I know there are hundreds of girls like her in this system. And if one of them repeated second grade but now stands tall and speaks for those kids, then that person belongs in Congress, not mocked." JD didn't reply again, not because he agreed, but because he had nothing left that could stand against the truth spoken by those who had witnessed it. The next morning, the footage of JD Vance's exchange with Jasmine Crockett spread across every major social media platform, but not as a flashy, heavily edited segment. It was a 38-second clip showing one moment, Jasmine holding up that old paper and saying, "No one asked why I didn't do my homework. Today someone dared to bring it up, so I figured I should dare to share." That video, with no background track, no flashy text, hit over 4 million views in just 10 hours. The hashtag #SheWasHungry climbed to the number 2 spot nationwide. But what really stunned people wasn't the praise for Jasmine. It was a short post from Congressman Harold Guffey, a strong far-right figure who'd openly slammed Jasmine, as driven by emotion over logic. His post was short, just a few lines. "I watched last night's moment 3 times. I'm no longer sure I understand. intelligence the way I used to. Maybe we've misjudged too many kids just because they didn't answer quickly enough. I don't agree with Jasmine on every policy, but on this I think I need to listen. The internet blew up. Many conservatives were furious, claiming Harold had been emotionally manipulated, but others replied, I don't think he switched sides. I think he shifted his perspective. Just an hour later, longtime host Chad Kinter of the conservative radio show The Patriot Line went live unexpectedly. I've met Miss Ruth, the woman who called in during yesterday's show. She's not an actress. She used to teach in Garland, Texas. I spoke with her back in 2005 about teachers leaving because struggling students weren't getting support. I can confirm everything she mentioned is accurate. The anti-Jasmine crowd started to shift, not because they agreed with her views, but because her story had stirred something personal from their own pasts, the kids they had once noticed and once ignored. A TikTok account called amomdov.3 uploaded a clip. I used to say Jasmine just cried on camera. I used to think like JD that the past doesn't shape the present. But last night, when that teacher said she wasn't slow, she was hungry. I cried. Because my middle child in second grade has been nodding off in class all week, and I've never asked why. That video hit 6 million views in 18 hours. But the twist wasn't done yet. That evening, an old interview of JD Vance from 2016 reappeared. In it, while promoting his book Hillbilly Elegy, JD teared up recalling his rough childhood, once being suspended for missing homework. He said, I wasn't lazy. I was hungry, and I didn't know if asking for food was something to be embarrassed about. That sentence almost the same as Jasmine's words the night before. The internet exploded again, so when you were hungry, it was worthy of sympathy. But when she was, it was a joke? The account All Our Veterans for Justice shared a side-by-side post with JD and Jasmine, both quotes clear. JD 2016, I wasn't lazy, I was hungry. Jasmine 2025, I wasn't slow, I was hungry. Below it, what changed? Because it wasn't the hunger. Within 2 hours, social media platforms were split. One side argued Jasmine was using pity. The other side said, we're finally being forced to see ourselves. JD Vance, trying to clean up his image, went live. I don't deny Jasmine's situation, he said, but I believe emotion shouldn't be the base for national decisions. That comment got quickly challenged by a college student's Instagram story. If emotion doesn't matter, then why'd you write a heartfelt memoir just to be heard? Even people outside politics were tuning in. A primary school teacher posted, I don't care who's right, JD or Jasmine. I just know this. Today I won't scold the kid who nodded off in class. I'll ask, did you eat this morning? 2 days after the episode aired, a flood of surprising posts showed up on educational forums. Not from lawmakers or journalists, but from grade school teachers, lunchroom staff, and single moms. One teacher in Mississippi wrote, yesterday, I asked my second grader, are you feeling tired? A little girl softly said, no ma'am, I just haven't eaten, and I didn't know what to say. Another woman, a single mom of 3, shared, I used to watch JD Vance on TV every night, but for the first time, I cried when a woman simply held up a sheet that read, she needs food. I cried because I once wrote the same words on a food support application 10 years ago. The hashtag, #NotStupidJustHungry, blew up on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. But this time, there was no leader, no one taking credit, no familiar face. Just endless small stories, quiet but strangely familiar. But, as usual in politics, when something spreads too quickly, someone tries to shut it down. A segment on Freedomcast, known for giving the real take to conservative audiences, aired a doctored clip of Jasmine's interview. They layered a mocking voiceover over the section with Miss Ruth's call. She didn't do her homework, hungry or lazy, or maybe just another scripted sob story. This is Congress, not an orphanage. The video ended with the line, if Jasmine Crockett is America's political future, that future is being written with emotion, not legislation. Within 3 hours, the clip racked up nearly 900,000 views, mostly from far-right viewers. But this time, the reaction hit differently. A Twitter account known for busting fake news released a frame-by-frame breakdown, proving the voiceover was completely fake and not said by anyone from the actual show. The breakdown was retweeted by several respected reporters, and even a Fox News investigative journalist confirmed. Freedomcast is twisting a true story, and that's more harmful than bias. The public didn't respond with outrage, just one shared move. They reposted the original clip. No voiceover, no soundtrack, just the single page Jasmine had held, with the caption, "We don't need commentary, just context." As for JD Vance, he stayed out of the media for 3 full days. His office released only a brief statement. The senator respects different viewpoints and looks forward to continuing conversations on educational policy. But the silence left people wondering, was he really listening or just waiting for the reaction to pass? Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett made no further statements, no interviews, no panels. She just posted a picture of the page she held that day, now beside a clean blank sheet. On it, handwritten, "To all second graders trying to figure out why math feels so hard while their stomachs ache. I haven't forgotten. And you don't have to prove your value just to be seen as bright." No hashtag, no caption. But the image was reposted over 200,000 times in one day. Among them was the daughter of Carson Green, the moderator that night. She wrote, "My dad used to think strength was an argument. Last night, he told me, maybe strength is when someone chooses to share a memory they've hidden for 25 years. Schools began displaying quotes from the debate as daily reminders. Not Jasmine's picture, but Miss Ruth's words. She wasn't slow. She was hungry. No one asked why. In California, an elementary school chose to print that phrase right on their free breakfast menus as a promise. A principal in Boston said, "I don't want my students to carry Jasmine's experience, but I want my teachers to carry Miss Ruth's point of view." During a private congressional session, a young moderate representative spoke up. "We spent too long arguing who deserves what. Maybe the better question is who just needs someone to ask, 'Why didn't you complete your homework today?' No." And responded, but no one disagreed. And through all these changes, Jasmine stayed quiet. No media tour, no inspirational workshop. She simply showed up again at a routine House committee meeting. No press, no photographers. Just her, a worn suit, and that now slightly creased paper, this time laminated and tucked gently into her left breast pocket. And when someone asked, "Aren't you going to reply to the edited clip?" she just smiled and said, "The truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand steady." 1 week after the debate, a photo quietly began showing up on the walls of law firms, university study halls, and even bulletin boards in high schools. It was an image of an elderly woman with silver hair standing in the middle of a crowded auditorium, her right hand resting on a wooden table, eyes locked forward toward her granddaughter seated in the distance. The photo caught the exact instant. She placed down an old photograph, then turned and walked away. No name was included. No logo was added. No filter. No bold caption. Just a single quiet line beneath the picture. Not everyone who didn't get an education was unworthy. Some were just too far ahead of their era. That image didn't trigger a rush of likes. It didn't trend from anger. It didn't spark controversy like the usual viral debate videos. It simply lingered, like the way she stepped forward, then left without a word. But that still moment became a symbol, not of triumph but of truth spoken when it mattered. However, truth rarely arrives without pushback. A conservative organization called the Merit League re-edited the image of the paper that read, "She needs food," adding a faint line beneath, "manipulated by emotion or awakened by truth." The image spread quickly. One side applauded it as clarity in a sea of emotion. The other side was outraged, saying they had turned hunger into a tool of suspicion. And just like that, the debate wasn't about Jasmine or JD Vance anymore. It was about an old piece of paper with a shaky handwritten sentence. In a classroom in suburban Kentucky, a teacher printed the image on A4 paper and added her own line. "If a child comes to class without eating, the first thing we should do isn't grade, but ask, 'Are you okay?'" At an education summit in New York, the moderator began with a question. How many people here have stayed silent while watching a child fall behind, just because they couldn't keep pace with the standard? Nearly half the hands went up. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak to the press. She didn't respond to the ridicule. She didn't react to the altered memes. She didn't share more about the year she repeated second grade. She simply let the story keep moving, not through her words, but through those who saw themselves in it. And maybe that was the most powerful reply of all. She didn't need to win the argument. She just needed the truth to stand when it mattered.